sold the idea that financial independence is all about some number on your account statement, or even worse, that you don't qualify because of where you started out. That's just not true. It's not about some well-kept secret of the wealthy. It's about finding the right information and knowing how to apply it. On the Get Ready for the Future show, we're answering your questions so you can start making real financial change today. The journey to true financial independence begins right here, and it starts with you.
It is the Get Ready for the Future show from the 6th floor of 3 Financial Center in West Little Rock, Arkansas. Glad to have you along for another show where we are here, as always, to help you discover, protect, and share true financial independence. It's why GenWealth Financial Advisors exists as a firm, and it is why the Get Ready for the Future show is on the air. Scott Inman here with you, along with one of the GenWealth founders, John Shrewsbury, as we answer your questions again today. And first, to kind of get into things, John, just on a little lighter topic, I got to see Brett Favre speak at the Little Rock Touchdown Club earlier this week.
Yeah.
And if that didn't get you fired up for football season, this guy is he's retired. He's financially independent. He's not having any trouble in that department. But he comes in, talk about living life on your own terms. He is dressed in a shorts and T-shirt.
Right.
And the T-shirt says "Everything hurts." That's it.
Somehow I can kind of relate to that. I'm not sure why, but somehow I can relate to that.
Yeah, great listening to him, though, at the Little Rock Touchdown Club. It got me excited about football season, got me excited about the seasons changing, some cooler temperatures now in the forecast as we come to you here in Central Arkansas. And that's really, as you jump into these questions, John, it's about the seasons changing, right? It's going into new seasons for all of these people who are questioning things about going into retirement. Interest rates coming down, a potential market downturn. Things are always changing.
Yeah, they are. And it's constant in the financial business because markets change, but then regulations change, tax laws change, you name it. Things are always in flux, and that's why you really need to have a trusted relationship with a financial advisor, because it's our job to keep up with all that, and it sometimes is a lot for us to keep up with, but we try to stay as on top of it as possible, and we're going to cover some of that stuff in some of the questions that we've got today.
Yep. So let's dive in, shall we?
Absolutely.
Caroline on Facebook sent in this question: at what age should one start to consider Roth conversions from retirement accounts? I understand the tax implications, but wonder if there is value in letting higher pre-tax basis grow versus all Roth. Caroline, thanks very much. Generally, we would say to you that Roth conversions are best to be considered the younger you are. And really the concept here is a pretty simple one. You're converting in more than likely a lower tax bracket when you're younger, and you have, John, ample time for that tax-free growth to take hold.
Absolutely. If you understand the impact of tax-free growth, and we're going to get to an example of this here in just a second, but if you understand the benefit that has as far as your overall living is concerned in retirement, you would be really breaking your neck, so to speak, to put as much money into a Roth account as you possibly can. Roth IRA accounts are relatively new on the scene, although they've been around, I believe, since 1997, but they have not been around as long as traditional IRAs or traditional 401ks are concerned. And so you've got the preponderance of the money out there for retirement in pre-tax accounts. And you've paid taxes on that. You haven't paid taxes on those pre-tax dollars, and then you'll pay tax on all of it when you retire, as opposed to if it's in Roth, you pay tax on what you put in, but you don't pay any tax on what you take out. So I believe that a Roth IRA is a great tool. Now, let's go to the question. Later in retirement, you're playing a different game than you are when you're younger. You've got all that time to be able to take a look at things if you're younger, as far as the impact of a Roth conversion is concerned, and it makes it very simple to look at that. But when you're older, you're trying to anticipate and be correct about whether the income tax rates are going to be higher in the future or not. Now, I know that everybody kind of intuitively feels like that yes, I'm going to pay higher taxes in the future. There's no way I can get around paying higher taxes in the future. Look at our deficit, look at our debt, look at all the things that are going on. We're likely to pay higher taxes in the future. I don't know if that's necessarily the case or not. And there's a lot of debate, and we don't have time to go through that debate. But I think that's the game that you're playing when you look at this at a retirement age. A conversion makes sense if paying taxes on the converting money now is at a lower rate, and then you're going to avoid paying that tax on a higher rate later on down the line. But there can still be this positive outcome from it, Scott, because a Roth IRA has this almost trickle effect through your overall retirement, especially when it comes to how much of your income is counted as taxable in regards to Social Security.
Yeah, so I think that's a big component that's missed in just looking at it from an income tax perspective now versus an income tax perspective later, because your Social Security is somewhat the taxation on it. And that's one thing we should point out that people sometimes don't get, is that your Social Security benefit as of now is going to be taxed by the federal government, at least part of it. Up to 85% of the benefit is taxed, and it is based, how much of the benefit is taxed is based on your overall income. A Roth IRA withdrawal does not count against your overall income because it's tax-free. So there's no tax implication to taking any of that money out of the Roth. So from that perspective, I think, John, you want to have as much Roth money as you can. Now, I want to share a little bit of a client story here, because we've kind of set the scenario here that when you're younger and you're in a lower tax bracket, that's when the conversion makes the most sense, because you're going to be in a higher tax bracket later. It's not always the case, but it has to be analyzed. And I had a couple come in, and that was top of mind awareness for them. They're in technically their pre-retirement years. Now, I'll say the female in the relationship is already retired. The male in the relationship is retired from a previous career and is receiving currently a pension, but he is working again, okay? So he has earned income.
Right.
So we had to take a look at where their income was landing now when they wanted to consider taking a Roth, making a Roth conversion, versus when what their income is going to be in retirement. And is it going to be a more favorable situation? In their case, it was pretty much a wash because of the large pension that they were going to be receiving, and because of other income sources, including their retirement accounts that they wanted to withdraw from. It didn't make as much sense. There was not a tax benefit for them to convert now at X rate and withdraw money, or withdraw pre-tax dollars later at pretty much the same rate. So It was kind of a wash. However, what we decided to do, John, in their case, was, because he's still working, make a Roth contribution, because he's not over the income limit to make a Roth contribution. So because we still wanted to have the priority of building a large Roth IRA.
Yeah, a large Roth IRA does a lot of things for you in retirement. Oftentimes you want to go buy a car and you want to pay cash for it.
Yep.
But if you pull that out of your 401k money, your traditional 401k money or IRA money, then you got to pull a lot more out, because you got to pay the taxes on that money to net the total cost of the car. But if you have Roth, then you just pull the cost out, because there's no tax impact on the Roth distribution. So it is, even if it doesn't play into your income strategy, you still have an ability with a Roth IRA to make those large purchases and avoid taxation on that larger distribution. So I think that's also a real positive.
Yeah.
Scott, let's go back to the younger people, and let's talk a little bit about a Roth conversion and why it is such a good deal for someone. And let me give an example. Let's say that you're in your 30s and you left a job with a small 401k plan. That is a great time to consider a Roth conversion. So in my example, it's someone who is 35 years old, middle income worker. Rollover amount is about $25,000. Very typical of what we see in that age group of people that have accumulated money in their traditional 401k plan. Now, if they do a conversion, they're going to be taxed on that $25,000. And immediately you go, oh, wait a minute, taxes, you got to pay taxes on that. Yes, you do, but let's walk through this. At a 22% tax bracket, that's about $5,500 in taxes from the state, from the feds rather, and from the state about $1,175. So total tax is about $6,675. So that will come out of your pocket either through a reduced refund, or you'll have to pay in, or something of that nature. But that is the price of entry to this Roth IRA bonanza that I'm going to talk with you about. Now, let's assume that at 35, he goes and does that Roth conversion, and we invest that money. And let's use a hypothetical 10% rate of return, which is in line with what the S&P 500 has done over the years in really good markets. So over the next 25 years, let's assume a 10% rate of return. When he gets to age 60, that $25,000 that, by the way, he paid that $6,600 in tax on, that $25,000 is now grown to about $270,000. Get this, tax-free. Big deal. Tax-free money, as opposed to it growing to $270,000 taxable money. Regardless of what the tax rates are going to be in the future, you're going to pay less on that Roth money than you would the traditional IRA money. Here's the key, Scott. You've got to have that $6,600 available to pay those taxes outside of the conversion money, because otherwise you are doing what I call putting out a fire with gasoline. It just keeps, you try to pay that taxable money, that tax on the taxable money, and then you owe tax on the money that you pay tax on.
Right. And that's another reason I think that it works so well for somebody 35-ish years old, because what's happening in their life likely? They probably got young kids.
Yep.
They've got some good tax deductions. They probably have a mortgage. They've got some deductions where they're maybe getting a refund already.
That's right.
So that part of that $6,600 can get absorbed in what they normally would have gotten in a refund.
One other quick note on this. If there, for some reason, let's say that rollover came because of a layoff, and you now have a reduced income in the household.
Yep.
That's a great opportunity to do that, because you might be in a lower tax bracket on the actual income that you would pay for that rollover. It might need to happen, let's say, after the first of the year to qualify for that.
Yep.
But there's a lot of things there. And one other thing that I would say, Scott, imagine all of this information trying to be processed by somebody who only pays attention to investments.
Right.
That's the real key here as we talk about the difference between what we do here at GenWealth and what some investment advisor does. An investment advisor is going to talk to you about the investment in the Roth. They might talk to you a little bit about the tax consequences of the Roth, but they're not going to be in depth like this to help you understand the benefits of making a move potentially on your part to do that.
Caroline, I hope that helped. And if you're listening to the show and you want to know more about Roth conversions, you can reach out and set up an appointment with a GenWealth financial advisor by calling 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. Or you can even reach out via email if you'd like. Just send an email to show@getreadyforthefuture.com. And a reminder, we've got some live events coming up this fall. We are all about education at GenWealth Financial Advisors, and we have one coming up called Protecting Your Family Through Estate Planning. It's coming up on September 17th at 6:30 at the Chenal Event Venue in West Little Rock. So if you have some questions about estate planning, do you need a will? Do you need a trust? We are there with the answers, protecting your family through estate planning. Learn about that by visiting us on September 17th. You can meet the GenWealth team there, 6:30 at the Chenal Event Venue. Just visit getreadyforthefuture.com/academy for that and all of our other upcoming events. We're going to be busy this fall. Next up on the show, it's Sean from Little Rock. And Sean writes, my wife and I both have pensions. Can we do anything now to minimize the tax burden in retirement? I assume our pension will provide about 60% of our pre-retirement gross income. Sean, thanks for the question, and we should say see above. As far as tax implications go, that whole conversation about Roth conversions, is that right for you? That may be a way to prepare for a better tax situation in retirement. But let's explore other things as well.
Yeah, let's be clear about that. You can't do a Roth conversion on the pension money itself. That's
Right.
just going to come in. That's taxable to you. But if you have other money, 401k money and that type of thing, then you really ought to be on the bandwagon of looking at how that could potentially benefit you in the future as far as a Roth conversion is concerned. Now, some good news for Sean and his wife. Some percentage of Arkansas pension income is tax-free. I believe it is about $6,000 per person per year. If you have retirement income from a pension program, $6,000 per person is tax-free. So that's good news for living in Arkansas. If you have Social Security, that is not taxed by the state. The maximum federal tax, as Scott alluded to a little bit earlier, is on only 85% of your Social Security income. So 15% of your Social Security income is tax-free, maybe as much as 50% of your Social Security, depending on what your overall taxable income is. And if you're married and filing jointly, you are both entitled to that $6,000 contribution or deduction rather on your Arkansas income tax. But this really does point out, Scott, the need for forward-looking tax planning. And I've often said in most cases, tax preparers are really focused on what I call the rearview mirror. What has happened in the past as far as the previous year's activity on your income and how much tax you owe. They are focused on getting that 1040 form very accurate, and they do a very good job of doing that. People, stay out of jail because they do such a good job of doing that. However, very few CPAs have the time to sit down with people and really analyze what about going forward. What are the moves that I can make going forward that would allow me to pay less tax in the future? And so that's something that we are definitely in the wheelhouse of working on. There is, things like Roth conversions, retirement plan contributions, capital gains, how those things are handled. There's a long list here. I think I want to just suffice it to say that if you are not being talked to by the people that are working with you from a tax standpoint about how to reduce your taxes going forward, then that's a conversation you probably ought to come in and have with us. We talk with people all the time about how they can better utilize their investments where it lessens the tax burden on them. We talk to people who are over 70 and a half about qualified charitable distributions. Scott, I know you've done a number of those in the recent past, and that has become a very popular way for people to take money out of their IRA account, give it to a charity, and avoid taxation on their required minimum distributions.
Yeah, and it's gotten a lot more traction as the standard deductions have gone up. Fewer people are itemizing on their Schedule A, itemizing their deductions. They're taking that standard deduction because it's gotten so high. Now, it may go back down, as we know, at the end of 2025. A lot of those things are going to sunset, including the standard deduction amount, but it may not. And so it is harder, especially as a retiree, to take an itemized deduction because you don't have those outlets that, as we referred to earlier with the 35-year-old. You don't have the kids in the house. You might not have a mortgage. So you don't have ways to itemize your deductions and use that charitable giving as a deduction on your taxes. But here's the great thing about the QCD. And again, for our pre-retirement folks, it's a ways off, right? But when you turn 70 and a half, you are eligible to do what is called a qualified charitable distribution. And all that means is you can send up to $105,000 in a year to an eligible charity. And if the distribution has to be sent directly to the charitable organization, but if that QCD is done, no taxes are due. No taxes have to be withheld. So if you pull $5,000 out, if it comes to you from a pre-tax qualified account, you're going to have to pay income tax on that $5,000. But if it goes to your charity of choice, you don't. So that becomes your new, John, in retirement charitable deduction.
Yes, and it's quite popular, quite effective. But back to the bigger picture here, if you are dealing with a concern about taxes, you need to be having advice about how to lower your taxes in the future. May or may not necessarily be a path for you in that regard, but it never hurts to try to drill down on that and figure that all out. And I think that's a great service that we can provide here at GenWealth, to look at your situation and just see if there's any way to reduce that tax burden.
Just to say it simply, does your retirement plan include tax planning? If it does not, reach out to us and get started on that process. 866-653-PLAN. 866-653-7526. And for Sean, we're going to name your question the question of the week because it's so important, that tax planning. Thanks for reaching out. We want to send you a Get Ready for the Future Show tumbler. Just email us to claim it. Send the email to show@getreadyforthefuture.com. Moving on, it's Andrew from Jonesboro. How should we invest if interest rates fall? Would your investing strategy change at all? I know high-interest savings accounts will start to go away, so where would be a good alternative? Well, I think first of all, let's set the table with this. On an investment strategy, a diversified investment strategy should really include multiple asset classes anyway. So I think when we address this, Andrew, the first thing that we have to talk about is, would your investment strategy change? Well, we need to know, what are you investing the money for? Because really it should have only been in the high interest rate savings account or the CD while interest rates are up, if it is a short-term goal that you are trying to reach. Even in a high interest rate environment, for long-term financial goals, stocks, real estate, those asset classes are still the better place to be, John. So even in this high interest rate environment, I think it's important to say it only has its place with a certain amount of your overall wealth.
Yeah, I was really encouraged when I heard the Fed chairman last week talk about that it is now time to start lowering interest rates. I think that's a good thing. Now, if you're a CD investor or you have money in a money market account, you're going, wait a minute, John, why is that such a good thing? Well, here's the deal. I'm going to kind of editorialize here for just a second. After rates went up from being just on the deck, 1%, 0.5%, whatever the case may be, when rates got up around 5%, everybody's like, man, I can get 5% on this and I don't have any risk. And that's just great. 5% is wonderful. Hang on. 5% is not going to make you financially independent. Hear me. 5% is not going to allow you to get ahead, because when rates are high, what else is happening? Inflation. Inflation is actually the reason that rates went up, because they were trying to slow the economy down and tamp down the demand for products and what have you. When that demand is high, they can raise prices. And so interest rates have that effect of trying to push the price thing, or slow inflation, not push prices down necessarily, but slow inflation. And that's what you've heard the Fed talk about. Okay, we have slowed inflation now. It's down around 2 or 3% or something like that, as opposed to 8 or 9% like it was a year or so ago. And you've got a situation now where they can throttle back on interest rates and bring those down. I believe, Scott, as you alluded to, the thing that's going to make you financially independent is investing for the long term. And long term, you want to be in things like real estate and equities. Now, short term, money market accounts are great. Bond portfolios are great. And in a falling interest rate environment, that's where you're going to see some real benefit in bond portfolios. Bond portfolios got hammered when interest rates went up. We all know that there's this seesaw or teeter-totter type effect of bond prices and interest rates. When one goes up, the other goes down. So now you could see some benefit in your bond portfolios if interest rates do indeed start tricking down.
We really like bond exposure right now moving forward because of what John said. That interest rate dropping will have a positive effect. You can actually map this out a little more positively or a little more definitively than you can with things like an uncertain equity market. If there is a certain amount of drop in the interest rate, bonds will potentially do a double-digit return over the next year or two. So increasing bond exposure could be a really good thing to your overall portfolio. Doesn't mean eliminating equities from the mix. It doesn't mean eliminating cash savings from the mix, but a little bit more weight, we would call it, to the bond portfolio may make sense. And I think that's one of the things we're looking at with our retirement clients. Because again, if you're familiar with GenWealth, you know, you've heard us talk about the bucketing strategy. Everything when it comes to investments is about time horizon. When are you going to need to use the funds. So that's why at the first of this question, we began answering it by talking about short-term goals and long-term goals. In retirement, you have both too. It's not a finish line. You don't make a full stop on risk. You start to bucket those assets out in terms of when are you going to need the money. And if you're watching on our video version of the Get Ready for the Future show, you're seeing that bucketing strategy illustrated right now. The money you need in the near term is in lower risk investments. Bond portfolios could look really good in those first two buckets. Think of that as each bucket being about 5 years of income, roughly. So for the next 10 years, you've got some lower risk, potentially good returns out of those buckets. In the middle, we have a hybrid strategy that usually uses alternative investments like real estate. And then on the far end, you have more aggressive. That's your stock bucket. But if you think about that, John, as each bucket being about 5 years, you're invested in stocks, but you don't plan to sell stocks for 15 years.
Right. You have that long-term view on that stock. And what you want to do here is, frankly, take the gains that you periodically are going to get in that more aggressive section of that bucketing array and harvest those gains out of the equity markets and put them more in the fixed income market to be able to use that money. And what that does is it stretches out the time frame before you ever need that equity bucket again. And so it gives you more time for those equities to grow. Here's the rule of thumb. Time heals most all of the wounds that you could ever get in the stock market. It is very clear if you look at history, and I know that past performance doesn't necessarily equal future results, but if you look at the characteristics of the stock market, if you give something enough time, generally it's going to grow. Now, you could point to a single company that didn't happen with, but as an overall broad market perspective, that's how the markets have historically worked, and we think that is a good strategy to use going forward when it comes to equities. But here's the key, Scott. When you are in your 60s, let's say, and you have gains in your portfolio, you better be thinking about harvesting those gains out to be able to utilize that money. If you let your gains run and then the market turns down, you might not live long enough to get those gains back, depending on how the markets actually perform. So that is part and parcel of the overall strategy in the Ready to Retire process here at GenWealth that we use to help people to dampen the volatility of the market, to provide for long-term income that's regular, predictable, and dependable, and to provide them the opportunity to move into retirement with a steady income stream that they can rely on.
If you've got questions for the Get Ready for the Future show, you can call or text them to us at 501-381-5228. Again, that number is 501-381-5228. Always here on the show to answer your questions about money, whether it's retirement, whether it's Social Security, whether it's investments like we just talked about, Roth conversions. Anything is open and fair game, so get those questions to us. Our final question today comes from Maggie in Benton. Given potential larger market downturns, instead of throwing extra cash at the market, is it wise to save up enough cash to pay for a rental property for diversification? Maggie, let's address the first part of your question. Given potential larger market downturns, want to know why you're thinking that. And I said this, I was actually on Yahoo Finance not that long ago, and I probably have said this more than once with them, but they talked about the recession. Is the recession coming? And I said, a recession is always coming. And the same is true, John, for a market downturn.
At some point.
A market downturn is always coming. And I think the worry is there sometimes to the detriment of someone's financial goals, because, yeah, it's going to come, but you need to be prepared for it. Going back to our first, our last question about time in the market, there may be a downturn, but if you stay in the market and ride that out, history says you will be rewarded for that. But that given aside, we don't have a lot of time here. Let's get into the real estate question. So rather than, I wouldn't say instead of throwing cash at the market here for Maggie, you still need to invest in the stock asset class to reach your long-term goals. But if you know you're on track, and I would encourage you to plan to make sure you're on track for financial independence, and if you then have additional money and you want to get into the real estate game, let's talk about that.
Scott, are you familiar with the term shade tree mechanic?
Not until you brought it up.
Okay. Well,
You gave me a lesson in this earlier in the week.
Back in the old days, my dad used to be a shade tree mechanic. The reason he was a shade tree mechanic was that we had to take our car, or he wasn't the shade tree mechanic. We took our car to a shade tree mechanic because that's all we could afford was a shade tree mechanic. What that means is there's a guy somewhere that we know that knows a little something about cars and works on them under the shade of a tree. It doesn't have a shop, doesn't have any of that stuff. He just works on cars. And so what I want this caller to actually, Maggie, to avoid here is being a shade tree landlord, because there is a art and a science to being a landlord. And if you are a rookie at that, then you have to grow. But where people really get killed in real estate is when they think they've got this all down. They've watched HGTV or they've watched something, and all of a sudden they go buy a house, and now all of a sudden they are the dog that has caught the car. This thing is eating them alive financially. It's eating up a lot of their time. They're having to deal with people they don't want to deal with, all those things. Now, that's not to castigate the real estate industry. That is just part of what happens to someone who doesn't have the experience and doesn't have the wherewithal to get into this in a proper way.
It's different. It's different than investing in the market, and it is not for everyone. So I think those are the things you have to assess, Maggie, is knowing that there are going to be different kinds of challenges to this than there are investing in the market and sleeping at night and waking up and seeing your assets potentially go or account values potentially go up without you really doing anything. There's going to be a lot of sweat equity involved in this. Now, you can outsource a lot of that, and I do actually have a property that we rent on a short-term basis, and we have not really a management company, but we have people who live in the area that help us out and maintain that because we don't live where that property is. So if you are able to count that cost and pay for someone to watch it, to maintain it, mow the yard, and all of those things, and you get good renters and you don't have additional maintenance costs, it can be a very wise decision in terms of rate of return. But I think that's the key differentiator for me is the money and time, the cost and time that could go with it that would not go with stocks as an investment.
Or if you have the capital to put down and pay for a house with cash, then all of a sudden that's a completely different game changer. Yeah. Or do you have the extra income that if you don't have a renter for a period of time, then you could float that mortgage payment. Yep. Those are all things that you've got to think about. The mortgage payment is just the beginning of the cost of real estate. There is the time spent. There is, how do you diversify your investment? If you're only got enough money to buy a house or two and prices of houses have gone up tremendously, then there are a lot of other ways that you can do real estate investment. We, for full disclosure, have real estate investments that are professionally managed and highly diversified. You can determine whether or not that is a good choice for you by sitting down and actually taking a look at all the details of that. But it is way different than what you would do in actually going out and buying a real piece of property, because at that point in time, you've got a tiger by the tail. You have to have the wherewithal to be able to manage that.
I think, too, we talk about how the plan is so important from your retirement standpoint. I would also say you need a financial plan for the real estate. If you are going to go in and do that, how long do you want to own it? What does it look like when you do sell it? Is that rate of return calculable? Because it is. And you could assume what your rate of return would be on your investment at that point, assuming that you have it rented. And when are you going to divest? I think when we went into our property, John, we said, we're going to sell this again in 5 years. Now, we may not do that. It's just like the retirement plan. It's a living, breathing document and can be changed. But that was how I assessed whether it was a good investment or not, what we could potentially sell it for in 5 years compared to what money we put into it. You heard the final bell there. Time for our final thoughts, and we'll start with you.
Scott, as we go through the questions that we've gone through today, it strikes me that people love to make decisions in a vacuum, that they look at a situation and they ask a question about a situation and it's very specific to this situation. I think we have to think about financial planning in the big context. Are these questions important? Absolutely. But as you have heard us say on a number of occasions on the Get Ready for the Future show, it depends. It depends on your situation. That is why we always encourage you to sit down with a competent qualified financial advisor, someone that has expertise in the area that you're trying to delve into, to create that comprehensive financial plan. That comprehensive financial plan will inform a lot of the decisions that are being made, sometimes in a vacuum by people, and that's where people oftentimes get in trouble. They focus on one area of their financial plan or their overall financial markets or whatever the case may be, to the detriment of attention on all the other areas.
Got to have the education to make the wise choice, and wise counsel can provide that. And speaking of education, my final thought is a reminder one more time about the live events that we have coming up this fall. The most near-term one is Protecting Your Family Through Estate Planning. It's on September 17th at 6:30 at the Chenal event venue. Come find out about your place in estate planning. Do you need it? You can visit getreadyforthefuture.com/academy for that and our upcoming events. And that's all the time we have for this week's Get Ready for the Future show. We appreciate the questions. Keep them coming. If you have a question, call or text to 501-381-5228, and you'll hear your question on the air next week. We'll see you next time.
The GenWealth financial team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or call our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and GenWealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.